Today we're going to look at context diagrams and data flow diagrams, or DFDs. Now, these two are closely related diagrams. In fact, one is an expanded version of the other. They only show the data in a system, and it's important to remember that these don't reflect in any way the logic in a system or choices made by the user or anything to do with the operation of the actual system once it's implemented. The only thing that they do worry about is how data is moved through the system and how it's manipulated. So we look at entities which provide data, and we look at processes which manipulate data. That's the entirety of this diagram. Okay, it's a very simple diagram once you get your head around it, because it only has a very few number of features. So if we look at the tools within a data flow diagram or a context diagram, we have a process. Okay, so this is represented by a circle. We have an entity, often called an external entity, something that's outside of the system that puts data into the system. We can store data and retrieve it from a database, and the actual data flow itself, a single line with an arrow that is labeled. Now, the context diagram, or what we used to refer to as the zero-level DFD, shows the basic system in its context. So when we look at using a context diagram for the first time, we're essentially saying that this is the entire system in its whole. These are all the external entities that provide information into the system, and here are all the entities that receive information or the information that they receive back from the system. So for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to look at a hotel check-in system. Most people are familiar with how you check into a hotel. Okay, it's a fairly simple process. You walk up to the concierge, you say, "Hi, my name is such and such, I have a booking for such and such and such and such, etc., etc." So in this context here, we'll call this the hotel check-in. This is the whole system. Okay, now we have two entities, don't we? We have the customer, and we have the concierge. I'm not going to fit that in, I'm just going to conk. All right, now these provide information to the system. So the customer would have their name, they would have the dates that they're interested in staying, they may have a booking number. Okay, so they have that information is coming from the customer and going into the system. The concierge, on the other hand, would be sending in a formatted query, which is the information that's been given by the user, and they'd be receiving a list of rooms that are available. The system, the hotel check-in system, would be spewing out things like, and we can actually, this is a nice feature of a DFD, is if it gets busy, you can actually just create another instance of the user there. So we can say here that room options are being made available, and they can make room selection or room choice, shall we say. Now, the only thing that you need to know about this is that there's only one process. So in a context diagram, we have one process. And that is the entire system. We also do not have any databases. Okay, none of those. Okay, now we used to call this a zero-level DFD because this was providing the context for the data flow diagrams. And then they just started calling it a context diagram. So how does this relate to a data flow diagram or a level 1 DFD? Well, we start breaking up these processes. If we have a look at the hotel check-in, there's a lot going on there. You can think about it in terms of, well, we've got check date would be a process. We would have confirm room. We would have display options. We would have book room. Now, you might be asking, well, If they've already booked a room, or if they've already confirmed, or if they've already reserved a room, why are we checking for dates? Well, the thing is, we don't know, nor do we care, whether the user is making this choice or the other choice. All things happen at once. All options happen at once in a data flow diagram. There's no distinction. There's no logic. There's no decision making. Okay, now this is a technique that I like to see people use in their exams. You actually should, when you get a question like this, write a list of the processes that have been asked or been mentioned in the scenario. You'll be given a scenario that will say, this system is going to be built doing this, this, and this. It's going to need to do this, 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 and this. So list them out, because these then become the processes that you write on the screen. It'll also say the customer will do this and the other person will do that. So if we think about the entities in the system, we mentioned before we've got a customer and we've also got the concierge. I'm going to just shorten that because it makes it easier. And for databases, we're just going to have the one DB just to keep it easy. Okay, so the simple thing is, now that we've planned it, and that is the planning, we just need to put them all on the screen. So let's put the customer over here. And let's just start with one. So let's have a look at our list. Check date. All right, so here's our process. Check date. What information is going in there? Well, the dates required would be the information. Quite probably, what would be going in would be options that they would like what type of room they would like. 1, 2, 3 rooms, whatever. Or bed, should I say. What would be coming back from check date? Well, are dates available? So dates available. And room options. Now, this isn't a process that happens just the customer and the system. Usually, we have a concierge, virtual or otherwise. Now, they're also going to be participating in this process. Okay, so two entities cannot talk to each other without talking through a process. Because if you think about it, even at the most basic level, two entities communicate information through the process of conversation. There's always a process that happens between two entities whenever they are working together or using the system. So here, from the check date, we would have date options. And we would have room requests. And what would come from the concierge would be a formatted query. Essentially saying they've taken the information from the customer and they've turned it into something the system can understand. Okay, so what else do we have? Well, we then want to perhaps book a room. And this is, you might actually check for, why don't we make this one a little bit simpler and go check booking. To check for a room. Okay, so let's look at another one here. Let's say that we've also got, what did I say we're doing? Book room. Okay, so we're going to book a room. Well, when it comes to booking a room, the concierge might put in there the room ID that's going to be booked, so which number it is, and it'll send back whether it's been booked or not, so verify book. And out of the system would come the room number that goes to the customer. Okay, when we book the room, well, that's probably going to talk to a database. And that's going to be the booking ID. Okay, so there's a couple of things that you need to know here. First of all, a couple of rules. You cannot cross the lines. You absolutely cannot cross lines. Also, a lot of people get confused with the data lines. So if you could describe the data in any way and interpret it as a process, you'll be marked down. Okay, so here if we said instead of formatted query, you say query selection. Well, query selection could be interpreted as a process, therefore it's a bad data item. To keep things simple, you are allowed to duplicate anything on the diagram. So you can have multiple copies of the entities, you can have multiple copies of the processes, multiple copies of the data being spread around the system. You are entirely welcome to create duplicates. What you do need to be aware, though, is that it needs to be neat. Much neater than what I've done here because I'm not used to drawing on a tablet, but it does need to be neat and readable. These are things that the markers will be looking for. And that is a data flow diagram.